you're the champion, but all of a sudden it's like it's the ratings, it's the Monday Night Wars, it's all this kind of stuff is coming in, and then you and Brett start kind of butting heads and stuff like that, and then in June of '97, you guys end up having a backstage fight that kind of you guys are off TV for a week or something like that, and there's this sort of it's been told by various people, but there's I think Jim Cornette had said that you had walked into Vince's office with a piece of your own hair that Brett had like pulled out of your head, and you'd said, "I'm not doing this. Like I'm not here to do this." And
See, I've heard him tell the story. I thought he picked up the hair.
he said afterwards he picked it up because he was going to think that might be worth something one day. But then his marriage broke up, so his ex-wife's got the hair.
Came in the office. And
yeah, afterwards and just like,
I got you. I just didn't say anything to Vince, but just came and picked.
Yeah,
up
because he was.
And Vince didn't comment on that or anything.
But what I was going to ask is, one of the stories that's bandied about that is that you had sort of said, let me have my contract. I want to go to WCW, be with my friends, National Hall. Were you? How close were you to really seriously going? I just want to go. Just let me go there. I don't want to do this here anymore.
That part's all true, but they're separate. So the fight happened, but it did. I walked in and said, but it was just, I'm leaving, and I just, I can remember, PJ, because,
just incredible.
Yeah, Justin wasn't working that night, and so I said, dude, let's go, and I just left. It was Monday Night Raw. I think we were supposed to have a 6-man. Me and somebody against like Pillman, Jim, Anvil, and Owen, I think, something like that. But yeah, no, I just left and it went. I think we were in Springfield, Massachusetts, or whatever. Went to the hotel, ordered room service, and flew home the next day. Yeah. But that's it. Then so that was one thing. But the other meeting with Vince was totally separate, and and I think whatever, I don't want to say years, but different time span. But yes, no, I did. It was one of those things where, again, because it was one of those things where you understood like this is getting to be chaos, between Brett and I. And I did. I said, just let me go. I mean, that's nobody likes me here anyway. Just let me out of my contract. And it's funny you bring that up because like whatever, like on some of these tours, we've been talking about like, he picked you and Vince picked you and whatever. And I don't know, now that, we've been talking about this so much, I don't know if that, I don't know, made him think about that. Like, one of these days I'm going to have to pick one. Clearly this isn't going to work. But yes, I did go to him and said, just let me out when I go to WCW and, I'll be with my buddies and, you won't have to, deal with me or deal with him or any of that other kind of stuff. And he just knew, but he said no. Yeah, he just loud said, no, that ain't going to happen. And he said, look, you would be happy down there anyway. He said, look, creatively, they wouldn't let you do what you need to do. He said, and that's what he said, look, that's the thing that, more than anything, he said, as much as this other stuff, which I'll give him that. He's always known that about me, is that, yes, Brett and I always had our problems, but most of everything that I ever wanted to do stemmed from me wanting to do, again, this stuff, and just, it doesn't matter to me, but I want to go out there and do cool and fun and innovative and different, creative junk, with this character, with this guy. Again, I mean, it was whatever. That's where all the stuff from Jericho and Taker and all that nifty stuff that, eventually happened over the years, comes from, comes from, a creative being that, needs to get this junk out of him. And then he said, look, they're not going to let you do that down there. He said, you're not going to be happy. And he said, I'm going to let you go anyway. And then that was that.
So in '97, all this stuff's going on with Brett and you, and at the same time, Hunter is the blue blood and all that kind of stuff, and he takes the kind of punishment of the curtain call and stuff, but then he gets Chyna as a bodyguard and all that. What was the kind of time frame? So DX came around like August, September '97. How long before that were you kind of saying, I want to go with these guys, turn heel, and shift your character?
And believe it or not, there's only certain things I remember pretty emphatically through the years. Don't know the time, but I can remember us having the conversation we had done. We were on one of those, I'm using the term Bruise Cruise, but it was one of those things that they did where, we were on the cruise ships, and you're doing fan access meet and greets and stuff like that. And we just were up one night after one of them. We're eating late in the in the thingy, and that's when we started talking about I was a good guy, he was a bad guy. Uh, everybody hated us, and we were traveling together. And it's like, we need let's do something to where let's see if we can pitch them an idea of us where we can tag team together, and then at least we can hang out and yada yada yada. Go from that standpoint. So that's originally where it started. Was giving them sort of that idea. They took that, and it's my understanding that Shane McMahon is the one that came up with the Generation X name, because at that time, there was the Gen Xers and all that. And for the people, those are Shane was, certainly at that time, Hunter as well, but certainly more so Shane was more sort of in tune with, what was relatively hip and now and stuff like that. And I'll tell you what, I get and again, one of those things that I know people have different feelings about him, but I got to give Vince Russo a ton of credit for all that stuff too. I mean, he was a huge asset in all of that, and they're just, again, he was a dude where there was absolutely, and some of that was what it was, also the Howard Stern, big run going on at that time too, and he was just a big part of absolutely nothing was off the table. There was no such thing as too much or pushing the envelope too much. And once we sort of got fed with some of that kind of stuff, and we went out there and did it, especially, on live TV. Now we're going out there and doing stuff. And this was, again, this was long. This was when they just sort of gave you bullet points and ideas of what it is they wanted you to cover, and you got to fill in all the gaps. And then, of course, visually, you got no information. They didn't, that would, nobody sort of told you, like, don't do this or don't do this, or for the love of God. Because, I mean, back then you have to understand, no one would have felt like, oh, by the way, when you go out tonight, don't pull your pants down. It's just something you wouldn't say to somebody, because apparently nobody would think in a million years that a grown man would pull his clothes off on television, but clearly they were wrong.
Sometimes you want to play strip poker.
Oh, well, then it's their fault for thinking they were dealing with a grown man. Because that's, well, and it is. We just started going out there and doing stuff, and we got in so much trouble when we came back. But Russo would pull us aside, like, dude, that was money. And like I said, it was one of those things that, you know, and there was even on Vince's face, though, he would scold us, in one way, but you could just sort of see, you know, behind him that there was a part of him like, if I could do that, that would be pretty, you know what I mean? And so, like I said, it was just one of those things that, again, you don't know it at the time. You just know that it's fun, that it's exciting, and when stuff works, it's out there, and when you guys are getting I don't, again, it's like, you see DX and you guys get, you respond more to that than anything else, and it was just a special time, and I don't know, you're doing something special. You guys know something special is going on, and it's a hard thing to it's a hard thing to beat.
Brett's gone. Vince has sort of made the call. Brett's gone. They're going with you on top, and you're going to go to WrestleMania with Steve Austin, all that kind of stuff. You have the match with Undertaker, but I believe you didn't really know how bad it was initially. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the injury and that?
Yeah, no, and it was just whatever bump I'd taken, 100 times. But I just caught the edge of the casket, and again, didn't think twice about it. You sort of go on. What I do recall is, again, I believe that was a West Coast shoot. And so after that, you're taking the red eye back, and so whatever you're doing the flight back, of course, I'm going back to San Antonio. So whatever it is, you're back at 6 or 7 in the morning, because I got to connect through Dallas and the layover, and it's miserable, and you get home. But you end up sleeping sort of most of the day away that day, and then and of course at that time, I could sleep more than just a day away, if you know what I'm saying. And so I woke up Wednesday morning well, the show's technically on Monday. You fly all night. I only stayed in bed all day Tuesday. Um, but I woke up Wednesday morning and just was frozen. Couldn't move. And I don't know. I've just I don't. And to this day, I mean, I don't. I've never been. It's like I was paralyzed. I mean, I've never been. The only other time I've been in about the same amount of pain is again when I tore my my meniscus totally out. You know what I mean? And that's just because that's just because it feels like, but that's just like in one sort of straight area at least. And this was just like it gets in the middle of your back. It just affects like everything. And so, yeah, I mean, so you start freaking out, and of course, it, I don't know, you know, and things, you can't. I'm trying to get to the phone and everything else, and I don't know if you never. For those of you, again, when you get in a helpless position like that, boy, it just sort of sucks. You know what I mean? And that's when you're truly like, oh, Jiminy Crickets, this is not good. Um, and so, trying to get to the phone and whatever. I did, I was by myself, so I don't have anybody to call but my parents, you know what I mean? And they live, whatever, on the, whatever, 45 minutes away on a different side of town. But, I called them like, God, I can't move. And, like, well, call an ambulance. So I call an ambulance. Sort of everybody sort of gets there at the same time. And by this time, I've managed to, roll off the bed. And it's like a scene out of a movie. It's, um, I've, you've got with the front door. You're like, well, when it is, I'm like, I'm on the, I had, back tile floors or thing. I don't know if tile floors are still anything, but so and that's as far as I'd made it. And it's like, I don't know, maybe 10 yards from my bedroom to the front door, of that house, and and that's as far as I'd made it. Like, I don't know, 30 or 45 minutes. I'm like, I can't move, And so they put me on the gurney. Anyway, shoot me up with Demerol, thank God. But got me to the hospital, and that's when like, ooh, yeah, that's not good. You're back, and anywho, and so that now once I find out what's going on, you go through the protocol. That's like, first thing you do is call the office, like, oh God, something is not good, and then of course, what that does is throws the entire company. You're the I was I was the champion, right? Wasn't I? Then yeah, and so that's it's what. I thought for a second, like, I'm gonna put myself over where I was, right? I mean, well, like he just knew whatever it's been X amount of years. I don't know any of that stuff. You will not find a worse pro wrestler than I am. I know nothing about this stuff. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, you tell them, and it's got to make, you just know that's gonna mean everything's got to change. We got to move stuff around. What I did know at that time, I knew we were going. There was so at that time we now have added doing those pay-per-views in between the Rumble and WrestleMania. And so it's one of the things like I mean, so I know I got to get to WrestleMania. I know where we're going with Steve. If let's leave me off of the next one, I will do whatever. You know what I mean. And of course you have to say you have to understand. Believe it or not, I could go in and out of even though most of the stories it sounds like I was the jerk like 24/7 like all the time. When when important stuff happened, I could, was like, okay, you leave me off this one. And that way but that's going to be the best way to get me to WrestleMania. Let me just do nothing but train, rehab, do whatever. And this is before, again, a doctor hadn't looked at me and said like, you'll never wrestle again. Right now, I just knew that I was hurt, needed to make sure that I got to WrestleMania. That was the next thing. And then I could take care of whatever this was. That was our mindset and our talk at the time, which is like, let's just focus on getting me to this show, getting the belt off me, and then I can go and we can find out what's going on and get all this taken care of. And it was just in that time in between where, you find all the really bad news and people tell you never wrestle again and it's over and yada, yada, yada. And now I've got nothing but time on my hands between now and WrestleMania to get angry and get pissed. And they're all going to pay, so.
But you go to WrestleMania, you drop the title to Steve Austin, and it appears that you're done. But what I thought was interesting is guys like Edge and people who've retired at points, they've stayed away because they thought it felt too raw to be around it.
And it is. It's so funny because again, you have no idea, and I can again all those years later, Adam and Christian, Jay, coming like, dude, that was like our first day. You're like, when was that? Like WrestleMania 14, and we see you. I mean, it was, and I just, and it was, and it did. They're all like, I don't want to come work here. You know what I mean? And it's just, it's stuff that I have absolutely no idea. Again, just so you never know who's watching. But yeah, I mean, it's just amazing, and I can imagine with first impression. Oh, those poor guys, and yeah, to think like I'm not coming to work for that place. That's a freaking loony bin, which isn't far off. But it was even, yeah, it was, that and I'll put it in here, that and Montreal, and there because I can't remember who else. There was somebody else that, again, it was one of their first times there was Montreal. Two of the again, and strangely enough, I was involved pretty heavily in both of them. But two of the weirdest, again, you've been through a lot of days, but two of the weirdest vibe-wise days ever in the history of the 30 years I've been there. You could just feel that, like, and again, even the guys that weren't a part of anything, you could just feel that it was just a weird, like something's not right today. And so anyway, that was, they've told me that story, and I just always think that's sort of funny. Like, oh my goodness, they almost scared, two unbelievably talented guys away from the wrestling business forever.
But you didn't really stay away because you came back and did the commissioner thing. And what I was kind of curious about was, and I'm not expecting you to remember, I'm not going to go like, see on the August 27th episode of SmackDown when you kicked this guy in the face, was there ever a plan to have a match? But I mean, I do want to ask you that, but I don't even remember. So, but like you would come back and do these commissioner things, and it would be, you'd super kick Vince, or you'd do a match. He was the first SmackDown with Rock and Hunter, and you turn heel and kick Rock in the face and all that sort of stuff. But was that hard to kind of be involved in storylines and still be around, but you can't actually see it through at that point to have matches? Was that, did you not feel too close to it at that point?
No, and again, I was still in the, whatever, I was not well stage. And I don't know, it's sort of weird. I mean, I'd come in and out, but there was no, I didn't have enough vision, it was not, I still felt like they owed me. You know what I mean? And so everything that I did, I just came and I did, and I freaking deserved it, for God's sakes. I'd earned it. And by that, again, now you're told you can't wrestle again. And the reason I couldn't wrestle again is because I was injured. The reason I was injured is because I was wrestling. You know what I mean? So, and if you put enough bad stuff in your system, and then of course, you feel like you've given everything, you've sacrificed everything. I've broken myself to pieces. I'm only 33 years old, and I'm told my life is over. You freaking owe me. You know what I mean? And again, well, I'm just saying, you want to, again, you want to play the victim. I mean, everybody does it nowadays. It's a pretty darn cool thing to do, but you know what I mean? But that's what I did. And so I just, no, I would go and I would do it and I'd leave. Again, it's like one of those things, like anybody like, geez, you missed out on the attitude here. No inkling. That never once did it cross through my mind like, dang, man, everybody making a lot of money, I'm not there. Never once. I mean, my life went from being angry they owe me, and then, meeting that woman, and, then my life just like, and turned around. I just went from being absolutely, it was, there was no time in between. It was one day the most miserable guy in the world. I hated the world. And the next day, like, I love everybody. And it is. And it's been that way ever since. Sorry. You know what I mean? And so I'd go back, I'd do my thing. And then I'd leave and I'd go home and I'd, go back into my, cavern, and I'd do that.